The night was dark and moonless as James' old pickup truck rumbled along the desolate highway. He had been driving for hours, the solitude of the road stretching out before him. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the only sounds were the engine's hum and the occasional howl of the wind. James couldn't wait to reach his destination, an isolated cabin deep in the woods, far away from the chaos. As he drove further into the night, his headlights sliced through the thick darkness, revealing the never-ending expanse of trees that lined the highway. The woods were dense and foreboding, their branches looming over the road like skeletal fingers. James' eyes were weary, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes followed his every move. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road, illuminated by his truck's headlights. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her long, dark hair billowing in the wind. She stood there, her thumb extended, a hitchhiker on this deserted stretch of highway. James was startled. He hadn't seen a single car for miles, and the appearance of this lone figure in the dead of night was disconcerting. His first instinct was to keep driving, to avoid getting involved with a stranger on this desolate road. But as he passed the woman, he couldn't ignore the pleading look in her eyes, the forlorn expression that seemed to say, "I need your help." A twinge of guilt and concern tugged at his conscience, and he decided to pull over. James rolled down the window and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need a ride somewhere?" The woman nodded, her gaze fixed on him. "Yes, please," she replied in a soft, tremulous voice. "I've been waiting for a long time." James unlocked the passenger door, and the woman climbed into the truck. As she settled in the seat, James couldn't help but notice that she seemed out of place, like a phantom in the night. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were the color of dark shadows. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Where are you headed?" James asked as he pulled back onto the highway. James focused on the road ahead, wondering about the woman's story. She seemed lost and ethereal, like a specter seeking refuge from the night. The woman hesitated for a moment before answering, just a little further down the road. "My car broke down, and I've been trying to get home." As they drove on, the conversation was sporadic. The woman didn't offer much information about herself, and James was hesitant to pry. The highway seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the woods on either side became even more suffocating. The atmosphere in the truck grew increasingly tense, and James couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, the woman's demeanor changed. She turned to James with a haunting smile, her eyes filled with an eerie light. "Thank you for picking me up," she said, her voice now devoid of the earlier tremor. "You've been very kind." James felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the woman's transformation was deeply unsettling. He knew he needed to get rid of her, to find an excuse to let her out of the truck and continue on his way. But the highway stretched out in both directions, and there was no sign of civilization. As the minutes passed, the woman's presence grew more disturbing. She began to hum a mournful tune, a melody that sent shivers down James' spine. He glanced at her and noticed that her skin had grown even paler, her features more gaunt. The eerie smile never left her face. "Listen," James stammered, "I need to make a stop up ahead. It won't take long. I'll drop you off afterward." The woman nodded, her eyes never leaving him. As he pulled the truck to the side of the road, James tried to think of a plan. He needed to get rid of her, to escape this inexplicable and increasingly terrifying situation. But as soon as the truck came to a stop, the woman's eerie smile disappeared, replaced by a look of anguish and despair. She reached out and touched James' arm, her hand as cold as ice. "Please, you can't leave me here," she begged. "I need to get home. I need your help." Panic welled up inside James as he realized that he was alone on a desolate highway with a ghostly hitchhiker who seemed to be draining the life out of him. He had to get away from her, but the forest on both sides of the road loomed like an impenetrable wall. Without thinking, he hit the gas pedal and sped away, leaving the woman on the side of the road. Her cries for help echoed in his ears as he drove, the sound haunting and pitiful. For hours, James drove in a state of dread, convinced that the woman would reappear in his truck, her eerie presence overwhelming him. But she was gone, and the highway ahead seemed to stretch on without end. Finally, he reached his cabin in the woods, but there was no sense of relief. The memories of that night, the ghostly hitchhiker, and the sinister aura that had surrounded her would haunt him forever. He knew that he had encountered something otherworldly, something beyond explanation, and that he had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than he could have imagined. As he stepped out of the truck and entered the cabin, he couldn't help but glance back at the dark highway. The night was still and silent, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the ghostly hitchhiker was out there, waiting for her next unwitting victim on that desolate stretch of road.